This is going to be the strangest story anybody has ever heard, and quite possibly the freakiest. All I know is that one fateful night, I experienced the jewel of horror stories. It started last night, as a matter of fact. It was a cool summer night in the lower 60s. It was 9 o'clock at night, around the time I normally bring my dog outside to do her business. She's a blue-nosed pit bull. We had gotten her earlier this year when my sister said she had a friend who's giving her dog away because she wouldn't be able to care for the dog anymore. I loved her the day I got her, and we've been inseparable since. She's such a sweet dog. She's the kind of dog that will try to cuddle with you whenever you lie down. We have a small backyard, but it's not so bad. We live in a mostly quiet neighborhood, and there's never really any problems. Tonight was different. I put the collar and leash on my dog, and we went out the back door and stepped onto our wooden deck. We stepped down the creaky stairs onto the dew-covered grass. It was a blissful night. Millions of stars twinkled in the night sky like God's diamonds. There was a crescent moon glowing like a torch. The only sounds were crickets, some passing cars, and the footsteps of my dog and I as we walked through the yard. Despite it still being the summer, there was a cool chill in the air that teased autumn. I loved this kind of cool air. It seems to always relax me. After my dog had done her business, we turned back towards the house. We stepped up the porch stairs, and I was just about to open the back door when suddenly a blood-curdling scream erupted from the street behind us. It made me jump out of my skin. Even my dog started barking at the direction the scream came from. I turned toward that direction too, but there were only trees, blocking the view of the next street. There's a house behind us too, so it's not like I'd be able to see anything anyway. We stood there on the porch listening for the screams to come again. Nothing but the ambience of the night. I brought the dog back inside, and I didn't hardly think about what had just happened. An hour later, I came back outside to take the trash out. Everything was about the same. As I walked up to the trash barrel, I noticed something. There was no noise. No crickets chirping. The wind was still. Even the street was empty of cars. I thought it was odd, but immediately brushed it off and tossed the garbage bag into the barrel. I climbed up the porch steps and reached for the back doorknob when suddenly another scream. The same terrible scream as before. It was a female scream. It still sounded like it was coming from beyond the trees behind my house. The screams again erupted into the night, but this time they were followed by what sounded like a man shouting. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but he didn't sound happy. I heard more screams from the girl. This time she sounded more distressed. Then, what had to be the most disturbing thing I ever heard was I heard what sounded like a man singing. It sounded like the kind of singing you'd hear at an opera. The screaming had ceased, but the male voice kept singing the same tune. Curious, I walked to the edge of my yard and gazed out into the street to my right. There was a T-section of the road that cut to the right before continuing straight. I was about to consider walking down the street to investigate when suddenly a figure emerged from where the T-section cut to the right. I immediately took cover back behind some bushes, then peered out again. Whoever it was had turned right down the street away from my house. There was singing coming from the direction of the figure, so I deduced that it was the man I heard before. He had a strange rhythm to his walk. He had sort of a strut. His arms curled up and swung back and forth, the way you'd see in a cartoon, at the same time taking big strides, all the while still singing. He suddenly stopped mid-stride, even stopped singing, and slowly turned back towards me. I quickly ducked back behind the bushes. My heart was racing. Who was this guy? I thought to myself. Did he see me hiding back here? Was he coming for me? And what happened to that girl? Was she dead? Was I just watching a murderer? I suddenly heard the singing again. I slowly gazed out from behind the bushes to see that the man had continued his awkward strut down the street in the opposite direction. Good, I thought. I sure didn't want him coming this way. I watched him until he disappeared from view. I knew that guy had done something to that girl. I considered calling the police, but thought against it. What would I even tell them, I thought? That I heard a girl screaming and I thought she was killed by some guy who I heard singing to himself? There's no way they'd believe me. I would need solid proof. I then had an idea that I regret to this day. I still kick myself for being so stupid. I stepped onto the street and walked to the T section of the road and cut right onto the street from where the man had came to investigate. It was a dark street. Aside from the streetlights, there weren't many cars parked on the street. In fact, I could barely see any cars at all. I searched along the street, expecting to find some kind of evidence of a crime or something. I then realized how ridiculous this was. What was I expecting to find? A murder weapon? Fingerprints? Blood? A body? I shuddered at that last thought. I sure hoped I didn't find that. I then had another chilling thought. What if that man comes back and finds me snooping around? I'd probably wind up like that girl. I decided to just forget about it and go back home. I turned to go back to my house when I noticed something out of my peripheral vision. I looked over and saw something underneath one of the mailboxes in front of a green-colored house. I walked up to the mailbox and crouched down. It was blood spattered on the road underneath the mailbox. Why was there blood here, I thought. I then noticed another drop of blood further away in front of the chain-link fenced gate. I walked forward to investigate that drop, only to discover two more leading up to the house. Before I realized what I was doing, I had opened the gate and stepped through. The blood trail led up to the front door of the house. Something bad definitely happened here, I thought. I stepped up the front steps and reached out and jiggled the doorknob. Locked. Of course it was. Why did I think it would be that easy? Better question, why did I even try? Why was I seeing if this person's front door was unlocked? I look like a criminal right now. What if the neighbors see me? I decided to turn back like I should have done 5 minutes ago. I stopped when I noticed a doormat under my feet. I stepped off of it and crouched down and lifted it up. There was a key underneath it. No, there's no way I'm about to do this, I thought to myself. There's no way. Absolutely no. But before I knew it, I had already picked it up. I put the key in the keyhole in the front door, turned it until I heard the click of the door unlocking. Then, in another act of sheer stupidity that I still regret, I turned the knob, opened the door, and stepped inside. It was dark. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. The front door went straight into a living room. A couch on the far left corner of the room and a small coffee table in front of it. But nothing else. I thought that was a bit odd. Why isn't there anything else in here, I thought. I walked through the living room and into the kitchen. There was hardly anything in here either. A sink sat on one end of the kitchen and a refrigerator next to the entryway where I was. Curious, I opened the fridge to view its contents. Nothing. The kitchen was just as empty as the living room, I thought. I spotted a door in the corner of the room in front of the entryway. It was wooden and white with a golden knob. Slowly, as if someone or something would burst through the door and kill me at any second, I crept towards the door. I reached out and grasped the knob and turned. It made a creaking sound that made me cringe. I opened the door to reveal a severely dark stairwell that led down to what I assumed was the basement. I reached my arm through the doorway and felt along the wall for a light switch. I felt one and flicked it on. Surprisingly, a dim light came on at the bottom of the stairs. Slowly, I descended the stairs. Each step made a creaking noise. I made it to the bottom and observed my surroundings. The dim light didn't allow me to see much. From what I could tell, it was just an empty basement, as empty as the rest of the house. Even the floor was bare. What am I doing here? I asked myself. Why am I in someone's house? I've lost my mind. I need to get out of here before the owners come back. I turned back to the stairwell to leave when I heard a thump. I turned around, but I couldn't see anything. My eyes adjusted to the darkness a bit more, and I noticed a big metal door locked with a door latch. Maybe this basement isn't so empty. I walked up to the door and gently put my ear to it. Something was definitely moving around in there. I knocked on it twice. I was met with rapid thumping from the other side. Someone's inside, I thought. I unlocked the latch on the door and pulled the big metal door open. I couldn't see anything inside at first, but then out of the darkness emerged a person. A girl. She looked to be my age. Her blonde hair was unkempt. Her eyes were surrounded by rings that indicated that she hadn't slept much for a while. She was dressed in jeans and a worn-out Star Wars t-shirt. She took a few steps toward me, eyes locked onto mine. Her chapped lips parted to say,
"Please, you have to help me."
"Who are you?" I asked.
"Julia,"
she said in an exhausted voice. "What are you doing here?" I asked.
He took me. He kidnapped me and brought me down here.
"Who did?"
The man that sings and never stops. I was walking down my street when I heard singing. I turned around and he was walking towards me, singing as loud as he could. I didn't think anything of it. I kept going. It got louder, and when I looked back, he'd gotten closer. I started to walk a little faster, but then he grabbed my shoulder and wrapped his hand around my mouth so I couldn't scream. He then proceeded to drag me down towards this house. He threw me into that room and locked me in there. Earlier tonight, he came back and opened the door, and I took advantage of the moment and ran out. I made it outside and started to scream for my life and for help. I felt him grab me from behind, and he started shouting. He was really angry. He then brought me back inside and locked me back up here again. When I was locked in there, I prayed. I prayed that God would send someone to help me. And then I heard someone out there. You. I knew someone had come.
"How did you know I wasn't him?" I asked.
"Because you weren't singing,"
she said. "We need to get out of here," I said. I turned and started for the door when I heard the thud of footsteps on the floor upstairs. It was then followed by the familiar sound of singing. I turned to look at Julia, and she stared back with a look of sheer terror on her face. She whispered,
"He's coming back."
I spun around, surveying the room for a weapon or some place to hide. But there was nothing. The only place to hide was the small room with the big door that Julia was in. "I have an idea," I told her. I grabbed her hand and pulled her into the small room where she was kept.
"What are you doing?"
she asked. "Just trust me," I said. Less than a minute later, we heard the sound of footsteps descending the stairs, along with the sound of singing. The footsteps continued to the door, then stopped, but the singing did not. The door slowly creaked open. The man then entered the small room. Julia was at the end of the room, trembling with fear. I slowly crept up behind him. I was getting ready to grab him when he lifted his head up and started singing as loud as he could. Then he whipped his head around to face me. I quickly rushed forward and jumped onto his back and wrapped one arm around his neck. His attempts at singing were cut off and turned into gagging sounds. Julia rushed past us and out the door. The man started spinning in a circle, throwing me off of him, and I landed in the doorway. I looked back at Julia and yelled for her to go get help. She nodded her head and turned to run up the stairs, but she immediately stopped and ran back to me, crouched down and whispered in my ear,
"He's blind. That's why he sings so much. He uses echolocation to see.
She then turned and ran up the stairs. I turned back to the man. He now had an absolute furious look on his face. He began to sing louder, but this time he sounded more angry. He quickly moved towards me. I leaped to my feet and ran for the stairs. As I ran up the stairs, I looked back to see the man already at the foot of the stairs, still singing his angry song. I made it to the top of the stairs and into the kitchen. I turned to see the man sprinting up the steps. I slammed the basement door. I noticed a padlock on the door. I locked it and backed away from the door. I could hear the man's muffled singing. Then loud thuds erupted from the door from the man pounding his fists on it. There's no way he would get through there. But just then the door started splintering. He was breaking it down, I thought. But how can he be strong enough to do that? I turned around to run for the door but stopped. I have to make sure he stays in the house and doesn't get away before the police show up. I heard the sickening sound of wood exploding in the kitchen. He busted the door down, his haunting song echoing through the empty house. I ran to the kitchen entryway. The wooden remains of the white door were scattered everywhere. The man stood over it and glared at me with fire in his eyes, still singing his angry song. He started to walk towards me. There wasn't anywhere to hide in this empty house, so I have to make do with what I have. I grabbed the refrigerator to my left and tipped it over to block the entryway. He tried to step over it, but I kicked him and he fell backwards to the floor. I quickly ran and dragged the couch from its corner and placed it in front of the entryway to the kitchen, so the fridge would block it from the inside and the couch from the outside. The man was now getting back to his feet. I ran and got the coffee table from the living room and placed it on top of the couch. That should keep him in there for a while. But just then the table fell from off the couch. The man had moved the fridge out of his path and was now pushing the couch forward. Why couldn't there have been more furniture in this house? I asked myself. The couch was now out of his way. He took slow strides towards me, still singing. I looked around for something to defend myself with, but there was nothing. I placed everything there was in the house in front of the kitchen. He was getting closer to me. What was I going to do? I thought, but then I remembered what Julia said. I reached down and removed my shoe. I tossed it against the corner of the living room. He stopped walking and singing and turned it towards the new sound. He slowly moved it towards the corner of the room where my shoe now laid on the floor. I took this opportunity to run past him and into the kitchen. I stepped over the remains of the basement door and started to head back down the basement when I heard the heavy steps of the man coming for me. I ran down the stairs quickly as I could. Luckily, the big metal door was still open. Good, I thought. That'll save me some time. Heavy footsteps right over my head indicated the man was now in the kitchen. I have to lure him into that room somehow, I thought. Just then I remembered I still had my phone in my pocket. If it weren't for the fact that my life was in danger, I would have kicked myself for forgetting my phone this whole time. I pulled it out and turned on the screen. I switched over to a music app I had on my phone. I turned on Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones and cranked the volume as loud as it would go and placed it in the small room. I quickly ran back out. Just as I did, the man was already coming down the stairs. Quickly and quietly as I could, I retreated to a corner of the basement. The man stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked in all directions, still singing loudly, but not loud enough to find me and all the noise that my phone was making. The song was shielding me from him, I thought. Thank God for music. He turned and entered the small room to investigate the noise. I immediately sprang from my corner and ran to the door. He was looking down at my phone like he came across a foreign object. He can't see it, so he doesn't know what it is, I thought. I pushed on the big door as hard as I could. I made a big screeching sound, which made a louder noise than my phone. This alerted the man, and he swung his head back behind him to face me. Realizing what I was doing, he darted for me, but the door was already inches from closing before the door clicked shut. Banging erupted from the other side of the door. I remembered there was a lock. I reached over and locked it in place. The banging continued along with the muffled song coming from my phone. I placed my hands on my knees, panting. It's over, I thought to myself. The police came 3 minutes later. I told them that a crazy man had kidnapped my friend and I and kept us hostage in his basement, but we then escaped. I couldn't tell them that I just broke into the guy's house because then they'd question me. They came out of the house 10 minutes later with the man in handcuffs, still singing to himself. Julia held onto my arm the whole time. One of the officers came up and asked if this phone was mine. I said yes, and he handed me my phone. "That's some classic taste you got there, kid," he said. I thanked him, and the officers gave Julia a ride back to her house. They asked me if I needed one, but I assured them I would be fine as I lived on the next street over. My mom was waiting for me when I got back to the house. She asked where I had been. I told her I had just gone for a walk and apologized for not telling her where I had gone. Since that night, Julia and I still talk and we even hang out now. We don't ever discuss what happened that night. It's been 2 months since we escaped that psychopath. I remembered watching the news one day, and it was a court hearing for the man. It was the same man Julia and I escaped from 2 months ago. He was in a jumpsuit, and sure enough, just as when we last saw him, he was singing. Still singing that same graceful, yet haunting song.